Brothers and sisters in Christ, welcome to the 28th Sunday of Ordinary Time, Year B 2021. I don't know if sometimes you have a fascination for electronics, but I just want to talk about this piece of electronics, this little gadget that we find sometimes inbuilt in our cars or on our phone that we call GPS, Global Positioning System. Now, it tickles my mind once in a while, to think, turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left. And when I am faithful, when I follow the instruction given by the voice coming out of the GPS, I arrive at my destination. It always tickles me because I say to myself, well, how come the human person is able to compress the geographic locations, impute it into a gadget, into a computer, into a system, and wherever you are around the globe, it is able to guide and direct you. But then, this GPS connects and makes real for me today the readings of this Sunday. But with a difference. GPS, human invention and human knowledge computed into a gadget to help us navigate, travel around. But this Sunday is Spirit of God Sunday. Instead of a GPS, Spirit of God. But how do we arrive at talking about Spirit of God Sunday? Because the book of wisdom that normally teaches us about wisdom, about how to live on this planet Earth, starts out with almost two contradictory statements. If you paid attention, the very first sentence that opens our first reading says, I prayed and prudence was given to me. Prudence is a virtue, a cardinal virtue. But then, you have immediately after that, I pleaded, and the spirit of wisdom was given to me. So now it's as if we have virtue of prudence and the spirit of wisdom. So one is a virtue, one is a spirit. And now you begin to see GPS, direction, spirit, wisdom. And to help us understand the attributes of wisdom, we are told wisdom comes with riches. Wisdom helps to coordinate everything else. So wisdom is not just one particular thing, but an assemblage of a number of virtues, and riches, other things that are not on the level of virtues, but some of the things that we use on the planet Earth, some of the things that help to keep spirit, soul, and body together. And then I said to myself, all these goodies, virtues or not, that come together under wisdom, wisdom coordinates them. Then I said to myself, GPS, Global Positioning System. So you go get all the geographic locations, impute them into a machine, and the machine directs people. The wisdom of God plays the same role, but on a different level, and even on a higher level. The Spirit of God, the wisdom of God, is what helps us to navigate life And not only navigating life, it has been imputed by God. So that's why it's God's Spirit Sunday. So it is God who gives the Spirit, and when He gives the Spirit, then we're able to navigate through life. But why do we need this navigator, this GPS? Look at the gospel of today, because the first reading builds into the gospel. The gospel presents two scenarios. The very first one, a young man seeking direction. He needed a GPS. So he comes to Jesus and says, I want to make heaven. How do I get to heaven? And Jesus says to him, well, first step, the commandments of God. He said, this is no-brainer. I have been faithful to that all my life. Since my youth, I have a mastery of God's commandments. And Jesus falls in love with this man. But then Jesus says to him, one thing is lacking. You have taken the first step. Mastery of commandments. You have the virtues, the discipline, preparing you for the next step. The next step, go sell your wealth. Get rid of your wealth. Then come, follow me. The second step, the rich man fails woefully. He chickens out. He abandons Jesus. He did not see the connection between the keeping of God's commandments and God's mission. God's calling him to heaven, to the company of God. Jesus says to him, go sell everything. Come follow me. I am the GPS that leads you to God. All you have been preparations. Coming to me, and the last step is following me. In other words, instead of GPS, global positioning system, we now have God's positioning or God's presence seeking. So GPS for a Christian is God's presence seeking. So our GPS is to seek the presence of God, is to seek the direction to heaven. And Jesus gives that direction. The Spirit of God gives that direction. And I begin to see the connection. Virtues, very important. We have instance of prudence in the first reading. But virtues must come together under this compound name, wisdom. Must come under the Spirit of God for guidance to lead us to God. GPS for a Christian, God's positioning seeking. The Spirit of God, our GPS, helps us to navigate to God, helps us to navigate to heaven, the presence of God, the company of God. And when Jesus says to the rich man, first step, you have done your best. Second step now, follow me. And that was the problem. Remember that there are people who keep even mock the commandments of God better than Christians. Doesn't mean that they are in heaven. There are people who acquire virtue because they are virtuous people. They want to lead by example. They want to be honest and fair to people. They want justice. They've never put their step in a church, and they don't even care about that. What makes you different, what makes God's Spirit Sunday important is this difference. God's presence or God's positioning seeking. You have to be a seeker of God's presence, God's position. And when you are, then you're in the company of God. Then the disciplines you have acquired, discipline, virtues, they only prepare you for the presence of God, for the mission God has for you. Rich people are not the only people who have difficulties following God. In fact, first letter of John, chapter 2, verse 16 says, our wealth can impede us. Our desire for power can impede us. Sex or desire after the flesh can impede us. You. What is going to impede you, stop you from locating God and living in the presence of God? Remember what the second reading says. We need God's Spirit Sunday because that is Judgment Day. You must render an account of what you have been doing on earth. So, turn on your GPS, God's positioning seeking, and find Him. Listen to what He wants